Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp and I'm the Chief Digital Officer at DATAVERSITY, and this is My Career in Data, a DATAVERSITY Talks podcast dedicated to learning from those who have careers in data management, to understand how they got there, and to talk with people who help make those careers a little bit easier. To keep up to date in the latest in data management education, go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Hello and welcome to My Career in Data, a podcast where we discuss with industry leaders and experts how they have built their careers. I'm your host, Shannon Kemp, and today we're talking to Samuel Spencer from Aristotle Metadata. Today, we are joined by Samuel Spencer, CEO and co-founder of Aristotle Metadata. And normally, this is where a podcast host would read a short bio of the guest, but in this podcast, it's your bio that we're here to talk about. So, hello and welcome.
Hi, Shannon. Nice to be here.
I'm so grateful for you being here. And I'm so excited because we recently met at the DATAVERSITY Data Governance and Information Quality Conference in San Diego a couple weeks ago. Had so much fun chatting and got to know you a little bit and hear a little bit about your story. So I'm excited to hear more about how you got into founding a company.
It's a really long journey. It's an interesting story. So I'm really excited to tell it to you.
Me too. Okay, so let's start with where you are. You are the CEO and co-founder of Aristotle Metadata. So tell me, for those who may not know, what type of business is Aristotle Metadata?
So we're a software as a services company that provides data governance platforms that help organizations understand what data they have, who's responsible for it, and probably more importantly, why it's being collected. So the way that I like to explain it is it's a little bit like Jira for data governance. Jira isn't just for project managers. It's a platform where project managers can kind of communicate to everybody across the organization. And it's a place where, if you're just starting your career, it's a tool you can use to kind of learn what project management is. We see Aristotle as the same for data governance. It's a place where data governance experts like ourselves can help everybody become a data steward so that we can focus on doing less and reviewing more, which is, I think, one of those lessons that they teach you in management is like, management is not doing, it's more about reviewing. So that's what we do.
Oh, that's very, very nice. And so tell me, as the CEO and co-founder, what is it that you do? What's your daily, in and out look like?
I do everything else. So we when we started the company, or when you start a company, you do everything. Like, you do everything. So my role was I was the technical co-founder. So I was responsible for building the product. So I had a background in computer science. And as we've grown, lots of those responsibilities have kind of fallen away to other people. So at the moment, like, probably my two biggest roles are around training. So how to use the platform, and training on new methods and new approaches in how data governance can be done and communicated to organizations. And recently, I've been doing a lot of research, because one of the things they don't tell you is when you start a metadata software company, you actually have to sell people on metadata first. You can't just rely on people wanting to do it. So over time, I've actually started to see some techniques that are really good for communicating why data governance is actually something you want to do. Because, the other thing is every CEO is a salesperson. So, how could I help people understand, why data governance is important, and how to kind of communicate that into their own organizations to invest in data governance as a principle.
Very, very nice. And so, and tell me, Sam, so you're building a tool, a software as a service that, encapsulates the data and works with the data. But how do you work with data in your day-to-day job?
A big part of it is a lot of my job, like every executive, a lot of my job is data driven. So I'm looking at reports on a regular basis around the performance of the company, the growth of the company, and that's things like marketing metrics, it's sales metrics, it's server uptime. So a really big part of my role is just understanding what's happening, because one of those hard lessons is you just can't be involved in everything. You just have to rely on good data coming in. And that's been really educational for me, because you start to see why data becomes important and where those challenges come. One of the things that I like to say is we have, we've got 30 people back in Australia. We have probably 3 or 4 different definitions of client, and that might sound weird. You'd say, well, you're an expert. Shouldn't you have just had one definition and kept that? And the reality is that often, client will mean different things to different people. Like sales actually thinks about it differently to how our operations staff do. They think about, what it looks like for a client from a server perspective, not a sales perspective. So part of my role is really around, just analyzing what we're doing, how we're doing, where we can improve. And that's really helped. Probably that second bit is around a lot of that research of, analyzing how people talk about it and how we can communicate why data governance is important is a big thing I'm doing at the moment is doing some surveys into how we can help, professionals like you and I talk about why data governance is something we just have to invest in. It's such a good thing for us to do.
I can totally relate. I mean, being, a small company ourselves, the irony of what we do, right? We still have to manage our own data, right? And we did a very similar exercise in the company to go through and decide what is the definition of customer, right? What is the definition of a customer for DataVersity? And we have several definitions as well.
Like the thing that I like to say there is I think we forget to realize that data comes from people doing business. Like it comes from somebody doing their job. Like people don't go, I'm going to create some data today. They go, I'm going to run a sales campaign, or I'm going to run a marketing campaign, or, they don't go, oh, I'm going to make some uptime data. You go, I need to deliver servers to a person. And I think for DataVersity, you didn't go like, we're going to get a whole bunch of data. You said, we need a conference. We're going to have a conference. And to run a conference, we need attendees and we need to know about, what food to serve them. You probably didn't think data. You thought, I want to run a conference. And data is the secondary effect that comes from us doing our jobs.
It's very, very true. Okay, normally I save this question for later in the interview, but I'm going to pull it up here now because it seems very appropriate to where we're going. Tell me, Sam, especially since you have founded a company around data, what is your definition of data?
I think you probably get a different definition every time you do this, which is probably really interesting. But the way that I like to define it is, and I've got it on my screen because I talk about this in training, is data is the information we collect about standard business activities to help us understand how the business operates. And the reason, the second question you probably want to ask is, why do you define it like that? Is when we have all of this data, when we have so much data, I think that definition of tying it back to business outcomes is really important for helping us understand where the scope of data stops in an organization. Because, when I get home, we've had a really big year to celebrate. We're going to go out to lunch, which means we're going to have to get some dietary requirements. We're going to have to get some menu orders from the team. We don't need that. We don't need to keep that long term. It's not going to help our business operate better to keep everybody's food order and everybody's preferred pizza. So being able to say, really data from an organizational perspective is about what the business does to improve how the business operates is critical, I think, to making sure that we don't take on too much.
Indeed. All right. So let's get into, let's back it up here a little bit and let's talk about how you got into your current role and how you got into knowing so much about data and forming this opinion on where the definition. So tell me, Sam, when you were, say, 6 years old, what was the dream? What did you think to yourself? I want to grow up to be, did you say, I'm going to grow up and be a CEO and co-founder of a company, or what was the dream at 6?
I don't know, to be honest. I think I knew I was always going to be doing something mathy. I one of my earliest memories is probably we went on a family holiday and I packed my maths textbook. And this wasn't a textbook from school. This was one that I bought for fun. That was what I did. I just really found joy in doing my times tables. That's just what I did for fun. So I think if you could go back to me when I was 6 and say, is this what you think was going to happen? I'd probably go, Yeah, it sounds about right. Like that tracks.
That's awesome. I love that. I can, again, I can relate on so many levels, but okay, so math is your jam. So you start growing up, you start going through school, what do you start? Do you keep going with the math, or what do you start studying?
So I was like a 90s kid. I'm going to age myself. So I was a 90s kid, and that was when computers, I think, were really starting to get big from a residential, like from a home perspective. And my parents were really supportive of what I was doing. And my mum, she's a self-confessed technophobe. Like, she hates things with circuits in. And she said, she's like, I don't get it. I don't like it, but this is what it has to be. And my mum and dad saved up and got me my first computer. And that's where I got the bug for programming is because, programming is applied logic. They saw that I did a lot of, whenever we went to my grandma's house, my grandma had like a Commodore 64 that she was very proud of. And what I would do is we'd go up like once or twice a month. And during the month, I'd get my textbooks and I'd write everything down on paper. In the 90s, by the way, not that long ago. I'd write all of my computer programs down on a piece of paper, and I'd have to think them through. And then I'd go, we'd go to grandma's house, and as soon as we were finished with lunch, I'd run in and I'd start typing things out, and I'd see what happened. And you really get an appreciation. Like, I think we don't realize how great computers are, because you get a really big appreciation for making sure you're not writing that many bugs when you're not going to get another chance to run it for like 2 weeks. So that was, I think, the next big transition was like getting onto computers and going, this is like math, but 10 times faster.
Indeed. So as you progress, though, as you get, what's your, as you're navigating through school, are you studying computers, and as you go, it can start choosing what courses you take? What are you leaning towards? Where's your first job going ahead, and how are you getting into that?
Well, so I did some computer school classes. I really flunked out of English, which kind of limited what I could do when I graduated. So naturally, the very next thing I did was I went into nursing. So I was like, well, I got in and I'm going to give this a shot. So I did that for a little while, and I was reflecting on it in preparation for this. And there was a story that I like to tell, because I'm actually not a big fan of, over digitization of systems. And one thing that I remember was when we were in nursing, it's very data driven. It's very data driven. You go around once an hour and you take everybody's pulse, you take everybody's temperature, you take everybody's blood pressure, and you'd have to write it down. And on the sheet, we every single person, we would write them. We'd not only write it down, but we would actually plot it hour by hour. We'd plot how fast their breathing was, how fast their heart rate was, and if somebody was coming out of recovery, or if they were like in surgery, or if they were really unwell, you might do that once every 15 minutes. And what they told us was, look for the trend line. Like, when you're writing it down on a piece of paper, 15 minute by 15 minute, and you're starting to see someone's pulse rate go down, like, and you're drawing it with a pen, and you're starting to see someone's respiration, like their breathing rate, go down, and you're drawing it down, and it's very visceral, and you're like, something's wrong. Like, it's very hard to skip over that. It's very hard to miss it. And that's what I think we're missing now, is like that visceral attachment to the data. I think when you're drawing it out, when you're having to make a graph, with pen and paper, as archaic as it sounds, you start to get a feeling for what you're looking at. Like, you start to feel like you start to get an intuition as you're going through about what you should be looking for.
Don't disagree with that. Somebody who prints things out on the regular to observe it and write it out, and to really make sure I'm grasping it and retaining it. So nursing, what made you go towards nursing?
My mom was a nurse, and like I said, like a lot of the major like degrees that I wanted to get into required a higher score of English for the universities. So like my backup was, I was like, my mom was a nurse. My couple of my aunts were nurses, my grandma, did some healthcare stuff. So I'm like, well, that's what I'm going to do, I guess. I'm just going to give that a shot. And I gave that a shot for a couple of years. Once I got a chance, I actually pivoted back into computing. But I learned a lot. Like there was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of research in health informatics, and it gave me, just like I said, like a very different appreciation for what data means, because it's. I think we get detached from what data is about, and when you're drawing and when you're recording the data, and you're looking at a person in the eyes, and you can see that like this is they just kind of relate one to one. You start to understand why data matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, so you're in nursing, and you mentioned that you're getting into computing again. So how do you start that pivot?
So that was just a change of degree. I changed my degree and I kind of moved across. So I moved campus and I just kind of started again and was going through that degree. And that was a bit, that was just like my next natural progression was just getting into software design, software engineering. When I was doing that, probably my fun story there is, as I was doing that, I got a job through my dad. He helped me get a job in a warehouse of all places. And I'm probably one of the few people you've spoken to who worked in a data warehouse. Not with a data warehouse. I worked in a data warehouse.
Physical warehouse, yeah.
It was it was a massive warehouse filled with tapes, of seismic data from before I was born. And my job was taking them from the box, like going into the warehouse, going into the data warehouse, finding the data box, getting the data tape, putting it onto a machine that was built before I was born, and then helping to digitize it across into a new archival format so it wouldn't rot. Like it was physically rotting. These tapes were physically rotting. So we actually had to do a lot of weird things to get them to work. So we had to bake them. So we'd take these old tapes and we'd be putting them in the oven to kind of cook and soften the tape so we didn't strip the magnetic tape, because this is data that's been recorded in the field. Like it's been recorded on a truck in a dusty, humid environment, exposed to the elements. And we're having to go through and go, oh, that data is from, that was data collected in the tropics. So that's probably quite wet. We're going to have to bake it a little bit longer. So we were doing all sorts of weird, funky science just to try and get this out. And that was probably the time when I learned about why metadata was important as well, is because, we would have to go into the warehouse and we have to find a box of data. So, we can't just go in and hope we're grabbing the right chunk, the right tape. Everything was labeled, where it was from, where it was collected, how it was collected. There was a little information sheet that just kind of sat on there. And that was what gave us the information we needed to be able to grab it out effectively. So it was, probably without even realizing it, was my first taste into why metadata was useful, because I can tell you this, like when the tape, like when you come across a pallet of tapes and all the labels have fallen off, when you have to open them up and try and rematch everything, you wish that there was good metadata on the outside of that box. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow, a little bit of a mystery there. That's I've never heard of baking the tape to save it. Yeah, that's fascinating. All right, so you're working in a warehouse, data warehouse. You're finishing up a computer degree. So where are you going next?
Where am I going next? I don't know. Like I was kind of working at a couple of jobs. I was bouncing around. I did a lot of odd jobs when I was younger. Probably the next big transition was towards the end of my degree. I was just working a call center job, and I found out about like a 12-week internship at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And I'd been studying for like 6 or 7 years, bouncing around degrees, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was like, I like data. I like data. Like statistics is good. Government job is good. I think that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to give that a shot. So I apply for this internship, this 12-week internship. And it's actually how I met my colleague here in Wisconsin, is through the story. So I was given this project to work on. Like they come in and they're like, do this project on this weird metadata thing. And I think this was the first time I heard the word metadata. There's this weird metadata format. Can you do some intern stuff and see what it means? I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I've never worked with XML before, and I'm just kind of hacking away. And what it was a standard called the Data Documentation Initiative. They're still around, and they do a lot of work on questionnaire design. So they have this big XML format for questionnaires, and I'm like, you could just convert the metadata into the questionnaire. Like, you don't even need to do both. You could just do one. I'm very lazy. I'm like, I'll just go do half as much work. What if we design the metadata and then just make the survey from that? And people look to me, they're like, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, look, here's an example. And they fly me to Canberra, the capital of Australia, where I live now. And they said, we're going to fly you in for 2 weeks to meet this consultant who, a gentleman by the name of Arif and Gregory, he's watching, probably was the start of my career, as this guy was in Australia, and he was helping with metadata for the Australian government. And they fly me across to kind of do a little demo. And he looks at it and he's like, you're going to have to present at my conference. And everybody's kind of stunned because the conference is like 6 months away, and I'm meant to be like my contract's up in about 4 weeks' time. So they kind of give me a new part-time gig. So I do that for my final year of university. And halfway through the year, I have to apologize to one of my professors, and I'm like, well, I've got to go over to the US. And he's like, well, we let people skip exams for sport all the time. This is much more important. Okay, fine. And so to go, I have to get a passport because I've never traveled anywhere. So I fly across to Cornell University, having never left Australia, having never really gone anywhere at all. I fly over and I present this research, and everybody's like surprised that we could do this. And that was what kind of gave me the bug, because I think it's today still, I think the concept of metadata is still poorly understood. And I think, we don't know why we do these things. And that's what's always interested me, is how do we help people understand the things that we know are important? And I know you and I have had some conversations about this recently, is, we know that data is important. We know that data governance and data management are important, but we struggle to get that attention elsewhere. And that's what what really fascinates me, is how do we get everybody else to kind of understand what we're doing? And that's kind of brought us up to today, is like a lot of my role now is, as I said, like for me to get product into market, I have to convince executives why this is important. And, to do that, we need to talk about value and say, well, if we do this, we're going to get better data, and we're going to get better outcomes, and we're going to get it faster. And I think people have done that without each of those steps, without knowing why data mattered to individuals, why metadata mattered to people, digging through the data warehouse, and how to communicate that to people so that they really pay attention.
We get this question a lot in our webinars. How do I improve my data governance skills?
DATAVERSITY's Applied Data Governance Certification. It turns what you're learning in our free sessions into a credential that actually signals expertise.
If you're leading or launching data governance, search Applied Data Governance Certification from DATAVERSITY and see what's inside.
You say this is the beginning of your career. So where do you go in terms of jobs next? After you've given this presentation, you graduate.
Oh, so where do I go next? So, I guess the next one from there is, so I kind of hopped around the public service, which was super fun. And the next place that I landed was at the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. And I was like a solo programmer on their metadata system, their metadata platform. We need someone to come in, and a colleague of mine recommended me in, and I'm working there. And I still don't quite get it, to be honest. Like it's only like in maybe the last 6 months that I actually understand why metadata is important. I've only been running Aristotle for like 10 years. And it's only in the last maybe year and a half I've really understood why everybody cares. So I'm working on a metadata registry, and we keep getting these emails in. And we get an email like once a month, and they're coming through to me because I'm the software guy. And it's like, health departments around the world saying, can we have this platform? Can we have this platform? And I'm like, this is kind of weird. Like, isn't there something else? And the one that I remember is, I think it was the Croatian Ministry of Health. I think it was them that sent an email, and they said, we need one of these. How do we get one? So I turned to my boss at the time, and I'm like, what do we do? Like, I'm really big into open source. Can we give them this? How do we give them this? And they said, no, we're a government department. We're not a software company. And I'm like, okay. And, as I was learning about what the system was, it was all based on like a nice, open, freely available ISO standard. And I went, I'm pretty sure I can build one of these. And that was what I learned after the fact. It's what they call product market fit. When people come to you and go, we want this thing. So that's what I did for maybe a few years. Is I just spent time hacking and building this metadata registry and releasing versions into the world to see who was interested. We stopped open sourcing a few years back for commercial reasons, but I was just like, well, obviously somebody wants this. Let's see what happens. And then along the way, I met my co-founder who was traveling through Australia, who really helped start that communications journey. So Lauren, my co-founder, is really responsible for the communication side, so that I was able to focus on the technical side. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there. Like, I think a few years later, we were able to land some clients that meant we could both, quit our jobs and do this full time. And we've just kind of continued to grow. I don't think I'm at the end of my career. Like, I think I've probably interviewed for my last job. I don't think I'm going to get better than the CEO, but I think there's still so much to be done around, getting people to really appreciate like why metadata is valuable and why data governance is valuable for companies trying to increase their value.
You mentioned earlier, and that I want to come back to, that you've only learned the true value of it in the last year and a half, which I think you've understood it a little bit longer than that. But what's really driven that statement?
I think what's driven that is one of the things that I did do is I about 4 or 5 years ago I started an MBA. I finished my MBA about a year and a half ago, I guess. And I did that because I always had a technical background. I always had a lot of technical training. And my rationale was, and I looked into this for a book that I'm writing on the MBA journey, is I looked into it and I think it's 40% of CEOs or 40% of CFOs, chief financial officers, and I think 50% of CEOs in the US at least have MBAs, have Master of Business Administrations. So I said to myself, that's what I need to learn. Like, if I'm going to talk to these people who hold the purse strings, I need to know the same language. I need to know how they talk. I need to know how they value things. I need to know what they do. Like, I need to know, when they look at a business, what do they see? I think the biggest challenge that I saw was, in an MBA program, you learn a little bit of marketing, you learn a little bit of finance, you learn a little bit of accounting, you learn some strategy, you learn HR things, but we never covered data really to a big depth. And I've looked at a lot of MBA programs, and I think that's probably the big opportunity for you and I is there's not a lot of depth of knowledge at the executive level to help them understand why data was important. And that's why when I say in the last year and a half, that's where my focus has really been is, we know, like I've known for a while, like metadata is important because it's just useful. It helps us do things. It helps us find things. It helps us understand things. But it's really being able to quantify and talk to that business imperative of going, this is good for business, and being able to say why. And we're conducting some research at the moment. It's still preliminary, and I don't want to talk too much without letting our partners kind of release this out there. But what we're seeing is, data governance and metadata are a multiplier for business value. Like, they're not nice to have. Like, we recently did a survey with 130 participants, and we found that there's a direct correlation. There is a really strong link between, data value, like between, good data governance and good documentation of data and how people perceive value in their organizations. And that, I think, is the thing that we need to hit on, is to say, we're not doing this because it's nice. We're not doing it because it's really fun philosophically. It's really fun to define customer. It's really fun for did you have a lot of fun, when you defined a customer? Like, was it worthwhile? Like, did you really enjoy it, Shannon?
Well, I do. I had fun working. Just so for everybody, we had a team exercise where we defined customer for Dataversity. We were talking about it pre-show. So, I mean, it was fun for me to experience the conversation and to have the, to experience, what everybody goes through, right?
And I think I think a lot of people listening will just go, it's just fun to define metadata. It's kind of fun to argue about how we're going to categorize or classify these things. But I think that's where what I want to do is take a step back and go, well, no. It's not just fun. It's not just interesting. It's not just intellectually challenging. It's delivering business value. Like we're doing this because it makes organizations more effective and more efficient. And I actually, as part of this research, have been looking into the data that we collect about our own industry, and it's actually surprisingly little. There's actually surprisingly little evidence around why we do the things we do. And I think it's just because we just believe it to be true. Like, nobody needs to explain why data governance is good. We just know it. And from my perspective, when I'm trying to convince somebody to invest a lot of money in a program, I have to talk, about that business value. And that's what I think the next big leap for data governance and data management is speaking to that imperative, saying it's just good for value. It's good for value. It's good for generating value. It's good for generating trust.
How do you think the AI boom is affecting that?
I think, I think, data and AI go hand in glove. You can't do AI without good training data. You need data to feed into it. And we've seen a bit of interest and a bit of uptake in people realizing that, you can't automate data if you don't have metadata that describes what it is. I've seen people go, it's context. It's metadata. We've had it forever. So I think that's driving it somewhat, because AI is helping make really bad decisions really fast. Like, it's really great. I saw one today that you can't Google for the word cancel anymore. If you Google the word cancel, the AI prompt just says, okay, I've stopped working. And if you Google disregard, Google just says, okay, I won't do anything for you. So it's that kind of thing where AI is really powerful when it has the right data and when it has the right context. And that, I think, that's where that value comes from, is, our ability to get those insights quicker, but it still requires good governance at the head.
Absolutely. So tell me, Sam, what has been your biggest lesson so far in your career?
I think I was going to go with something boring, like always ask why. I think I'm going to go with something a little bit more controversial and say, know when to push buttons, right? Know when to push buttons. I've made a career of making a lot of really good mistakes. I went, I was talking about that story where I was invited to a conference. I was invited to a conference because a room full of senior executives, it said, this is interesting, but we just can't do it. And I literally grabbed the monitor cord and I jammed it into my laptop, and I said, I did it over the weekend. Like, we can do this. That probably, won me from some friends. It probably lost me some friends, but it got attention. I've made some good mistakes, and I've had some bad mistakes where, there's good attention, there's bad attention. The one at the moment is, and I think this is what I presented at DATAVERSITY, is I was presenting on a data program here in Australia. The Australian government has been, investing a lot of money, like $200 million on a data inventory platform to improve discovery of data. And, over that $200 million over 4 years, we've seen 34 data requests. We've seen 500 assets found, and the quality was really poor. And I made a decision earlier this year is I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to show people what's happening. And that meant, writing down who was doing really poorly. This is, talking about the Australian Tax Office having one data, and this is what I presented at DATAVERSITY is I said, do you think it's right that the tax office has one data? And a lot of people say, Shannon, do you think it's okay that the tax office has one data?
No.
We argue.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. It's not right. Intrinsically, I don't need to go to, we don't need to define data. We don't need to define data to know that the tax office has more than one data. There's more than that, right? And I've repeated that story a lot. They still only have one data. Australian Tax Office, if you are listening, you still only have one data, and I'm going to keep pointing that out. And that's very confrontational. Like it's very confrontational to take that out and write that down. And it was harder because I was invited to present that on live TV, and that only elevated how much people saw it. But by taking that risk, we've actually seen improvement. We've actually seen a 1% improvement where we haven't seen improvement for nearly 12 months. People are actually going back, like, chief executives of government departments are actually encouraging people to do better because now we've shone a light on it and said, well, there's a reputational risk at play if you don't actually do data governance properly. And I think that's probably the hardest lesson to learn, is to know when to push the button. Like to know when to take a risk. I heard someone say that, company founders are actually exceptionally risk averse because what's at stake. They're very risk aware. And I think that's very true. And I think the challenge for anybody at any point in their career is figuring out what is the risk you can take and what's the payoff and what's the risk. And I think, figuring out what your risk profile is, figuring out the chances you want to take helps you understand how you can make those big evolutionary leaps in your career.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you're not always going to succeed, of course, right? But
no,
you'll learn from the mistakes.
Let me see. What was the biggest risk that I took that it didn't pay off? I think we worked with a client quite a long time ago who we worked quite a long time on this contract with them, and at the end, the relationship kind of fell away. And they actually tried to take our open source code. Like they actually tried to take all of our code and all of our commercial code. It would have been quite ruinous for the company, and we had to kind of fight to keep that and fight to retain it. And that was probably one of the biggest risks we took because it was very, very early on, was working with a very large client. So I think it's, you take the good with the bad. I'm always the worst at listening to my own advice because you forget these things along the way. But when you take a risk and when it doesn't pay off, I think you just got to listen to it and go, what did I learn here? And then how do I make sure that I can not have that happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Sam, tell me, do you see the importance of data management and the number of jobs working with data increasing or decreasing over the next 10 years, and why?
I think we're probably going to see an increase in jobs. I think we're going to see more people involved in data governance. I'm making sure of that, right? Like when we drive attention onto this, when we say, data governance improves value, we want to see investment in that, not just in tooling, but in the people to run those tools. I think, and I think what we're going to see as well is I hope we see a very similar effect to what we saw with Jira. Like I think Jira as an Australian company, Jira and Atlassian are a natural company for us to want to emulate. They were an Australian firm, they were focused on business software, and they've been very, very successful because of it. Mike and Scott, really, really eager to chat, but we'll see how that goes. But I think the other thing that we saw from that was a democratization of project management. Project management went from a really, really niche skill to all of a sudden everybody was an agile project manager. And I think that was a good thing because you don't need to be an expert in project management to run a Jira project well. Like you do your agile, sprints, you do a retro, you do some Kanban boards, and you're probably going to be pretty effective. And I think we need to figure out the same for data governance. Is there's always going to be a role for senior experts, really experienced veterans. But I think when we can really, put into practice, I think Rob Steiner said it best, the author of Non-Invasive Data Governance, he says, everyone's a data steward. I think, if everyone's a data steward, we're going to see massive growth in data jobs. But I also think that there's going to be a big role for, that equivalent of our para project managers, people who are, a little bit beyond where they're at now, understanding how data governance is good from a business perspective. So I think the growth of early career opportunities and the growth of democratization of data management and data governance is going to be really important. And I think the reason that has to happen is because everybody's making data. You can run an Eventbrite survey, or you can run an Eventbrite event. You put it up there, you start asking questions, you're collecting data. You go to SurveyMonkey, you can run a survey, you can put it online and you can get 1,000, 2,000 responses. You put a couple of ads behind it, you get thousands of responses. We're all making data. And I think we need to understand how we can get everybody involved in data management and data governance so that we continue to get value out of those assets.
I agree. So what advice then would you give to people looking to get into a career in data management?
I think I would really, really stress the importance of soft skills in quotes. I think, what we saw in that research was when people talk about why their data is important, they got more value. And why can't come from a machine learning system. It's not going to come from AI. Why did you collect this data? Only comes from the business people who made it. Why did you collect dietary requirement? Because I didn't want anybody to die when they came to the conference. I wanted to get a list of allergies because we forget about that, right? When you collect, there's two questions that I always see at a conference. You ask, do you have a dietary requirement? And do you have any allergies? Now, you may not be aware of it, but when you ask about diet, what you're really asking is you're asking about religion, right? When you ask vegan, vegetarian, okay. But when you ask, are you kosher? Are you halal? Are you Jain? You've got a proxy measure for someone's religion. That's a very sensitive piece of information. And the same for an allergy. That's medical information. We need to know why we're doing that. Why did you collect it? Because I wanted to serve them food that they were allowed to eat and I didn't want to kill anybody. All of a sudden we have a rationale for having two very sensitive pieces of information. So I think, I would encourage those soft skills. And I think that the opportunity for us as an industry to lean into philosophy majors and psychology majors who are both really used to asking those questions why and doing data research, I think it's an untapped gold mine, to be honest. It's an untapped gold mine of resources of people who are, I think, already trained and already well equipped to be the data governance and data management leaders of tomorrow, because they're the people who will help us make sense of why we're collecting all of this data to begin with.
I really believe in that philosophy, which is why we've made sure that we offer communication training along with our data management training.
Yep.
It just is so important. And a skill that we can always work on, right? That get better at. Yeah.
Somebody asked me if I got media training recently. The answer is yes, because you have to get better. I think we can't rely on other people wanting to talk to us and learning how we talk. The data profession is there's jargon because it helps us talk to each other really quickly. But I think we need to understand how we can break down those walls and how we can bring the impact of what we do, because they're not going to listen to us. Nobody's going to invite you into the boardroom. You have to kick your way in. I see a lot of people online complaining that nobody's bringing data into the boardroom. It's well, stop asking for permission. You're there for a reason. Go in.
I just want to expand just a little bit. One of the reasons I was really excited to hear about your career, because I knew we talked a little bit about the conference about how you started and as in nursing, in your schooling. We actually have, something I didn't mention is we actually have a lot of nurses who are going into data. They are transitioning because they can no longer handle the physical demands of nursing, but are not ready to retire. So they're switching into careers in data. So which is fascinating, and I love it so much. And so, do you have any advice for that community making that transition?
I won't name them because they're very private people, but it's actually quite a coincidence because one of my chief expert on metadata was a nurse, was a surgical nurse, and somebody who helped with the design of our recent maturity survey also had a background in health informatics and nursing. So it was quite an odd coincidence that we all got together and we all started talking about how we got to where we are. And I think it's for that reason. It's you interact with data on the daily. I think for anybody who's considering pivoting from nursing into data, I think do it. I think you're probably more familiar with the impact of data than other people. Like when you see someone has a pulse rate of 20, you don't need to be explained what that is. You just go, oh, that's bad. And when you start to see those trends, you know that's bad. So you know why data is important. So I would say, like, if you're looking at a career transition from nursing to data, I would not think that you're starting again. I would think that you are bringing a wealth of expertise in real world data application, and you are bringing expertise in how data has an impact on human lives that I think would be invaluable to the profession.
I love it. I totally agree. And thank you for that, for sharing that. Well, Sam, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, if people wanted to learn more about Aristotle Metadata, where would they go?
AristotleMetadata.com, of course. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. I think we're on TikTok now. You can follow our little bag. We've got a TikTok page set up, I think it's TikTok or Instagram page set up for our luggage. Little Lucas. So that's probably where I'd go. And I'd say, and also Aristotle.cloud. If you're in the industry and you're looking at bringing in a tool to help with data governance, we actually have a free tool that you can get started with all the power of Aristotle. Your first 10 users are free, just like Jira. I think it's a great model. So if you're interested in evaluating the system, or even just using it, because you can stay under the user limit, you can use it for as long as you want, like with minimal restrictions, to get your data governance really tip top.
Oh, very cool. Well, Sam, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Shannon. It's been really interesting. It was actually, I really like the idea of actually having people step through their careers, because you just don't realize how far you've come. So I think it's a really great model. And thank you for letting me share my very wonky journey into data governance with you.
So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you taking the time today. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like to keep up to date in the latest in data management education, you can go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.